A U.S. jury has cleared teenager Kyle Rittenhouse of all charges in a dramatic trial that has become a flashpoint in the nation's debate over guns and racial injustice. The 18-year-old broke down as the verdict was read. He could have faced life in prison after shooting dead 2 people and seriously wounding a third during a Black Lives Matter protest last year. The case has divided opinion in the U.S., with critics and supporters gathering outside the courthouse in anticipation of today's verdict.
Was it an act of self-defense or gratuitous violence? That was a question faced by 12 jurors as the U.S. awaited the verdict of Kyle Rittenhouse. He was just 17 years old when he shot dead 2 people and injured a third in Kenosha, Wisconsin last August. Protests swept through the city after police shot a black man, Jacob Blake, leaving him partially paralyzed. It came just 3 months after the murder of George Floyd, an incident that stunned the world and left America reeling, sparking a wave of anti-racism demonstrations at the height of the COVID pandemic. Rittenhouse said he was there to protect property and provide first aid. He'd travelled there from neighbouring Illinois with a semi-automatic rifle reportedly given to him by a friend. Protesters in support of and against Rittenhouse gathered outside Kenosha County Courthouse in the run-up to the verdict. The judge had pleaded with the jury to set aside political and public commentary and focus strictly on the facts. But in a case that crystallised the country's polarising views on the issues of race, police violence and growing vigilantism, today's outcome has implications far beyond those for Kyle Rittenhouse.
Joining us for more is DW correspondent Oliver Salad. He's outside the courthouse in Kenosha where the trial was held. Oliver, welcome to the program. Describe the scene inside the court as the verdict came in.
Yeah, Michael, I just left the courtroom, and of course, as you can imagine, the emotions were running very high as the jurors read out their verdicts. First of all, Kyle Rittenhouse, the defendant, broke down essentially, shaking all over his body. He was then escorted out of the courtroom very quickly after that. And in contrast, the family members of the victims crying, sobbing as they left the courtroom. Outside here, some people honking their horns, celebrating, others frustrated, arguing, debating. I can't believe that this has really happened. And of course, we shouldn't forget, Michael, that this is not only about the town of Kenosha. This is a trial that was followed very closely all across the United States that divides the nation. And so a lot of people will be either relieved or very frustrated with today's verdict.
Oliver, as you well know, we cannot overstate how highly anticipated this verdict was. Is there concern at this hour about how communities are going to react to this verdict, particularly those communities that were involved in these racial justice protests in the first place?
Yeah, of course there are concerns, especially here in Kenosha, because let's remind our viewers when this happened here, when Kyle Rittenhouse shot at those three people here. Those were BLM protesters that night taking to the street in support of Jacob Blake, that black man that was shot by a white police officer. So a lot of people here will be frustrated. The question is, will they come out? Will they protest tonight? We can hear some helicopters in the sky, but overall the situation here, at least in Kenosha on the ground, has been very quiet as of now. And let's not forget, again, that there's a bigger question, behind all this. A lot of people and critics are concerned that this is a blueprint now for people essentially saying that this ruling means it's okay to take your gun, your assault rifle on a protest and then act in self-defense later. And a lot of other questions that follow. Is this a question of white privilege, for instance, that verdict that we had here today? Questions of gun laws will be asked that are dividing the nation as well. And perhaps the most important question, what would have happened if Kyle Rittenhouse was a black citizen? Would we have seen another verdict then?
Oliver, before this verdict came in, of course, there was a request from the defense for a mistrial. On what basis did they ask for the judge to throw this case out?
Yeah, there were several of those requests, but perhaps the most important one was the one that we heard just in the final days here. It was about drone footage that was shot, about the drone footage of the last shots that he fired on Mr. Rosenbaum, the first victim. And the defendants say that that footage was not handed over to them in full resolution, whereas the prosecution had full resolution, so they saw some kind of a disadvantage over there. Look, since there is a verdict now, and the verdict is not guilty, all those bids are not relevant anymore because Kyle Rittenhouse is now unguilty on all counts.
That's right. Oliver Salet in Kenosha. Many thanks, Oliver.